It's great to have such a fabulous turnout for this event. I could tell that this was a really great reunion today when I walked across the Knight Management Center and I saw that it was the end of October and we were giving out sunblock at the sign-up sheet. So this turned out very well. So, well, first of all, Bill and Kim, it's great to have you here today. This is a real pleasure for me because in addition to, you just heard about all the great things that Bill and Kim have done, but in addition to those things, Bill has been for many years at the GSB a great font of wisdom and strategic advice for everyone at the school and has been for me personally, so lovely to do this with you. And Kim, even before she was a GSB student, we were fellow students many, many years ago at Oxford. So nice to get to do this together with you, Kim. Okay, so we're here the topic of today's discussion is Bill and Kim's new book, Engine of Impact, and I recommend it to everyone. I got an advanced copy of it, and it's fabulous. And essentially it takes what they've been teaching at the school for, in Bill's case, for more than 20 years about nonprofits in the social sector and tries to distill it down to give advice to people involved with nonprofit social sector organizations, which is such a fabulous topic. So I think the way we'll do this, I'll start by asking questions for maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll turn it over for Q&A. So first question. So how did you tell us a little bit how you got started thinking about the performance of nonprofits and social organizations.
Well, for me, it goes back, I think it was 2005, when I first encountered Roy Prosterman, who's the founder of Landesa. He's an extraordinary social entrepreneur and leader, and he is 83 years old and still works to alleviate extreme poverty every single day. Very inspiring. I was on the phone with him a few weeks ago, and he was about to head to Asia to do field work. And Landesa's intervention is basically grounded in land reform, which turns out to be a critical mechanism of extreme poverty alleviation. And over many decades, Landesa has impacted over 100 million families, which is 400 million people. And what's intriguing about that is that it's easy to assume that that's an enormous budget and they just got a lot of donations and so we're able to help a lot of people. But actually, especially in Landesa's case, that's not true. So in the first 20 years, they operated on a shoestring budget. They had an annual budget of less than $2 million, and the headquarters was in a small one-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle. It's where all the staff came to work. And it was so small that they kept half of the files in the bathtub. And they kept the other half on the stove. And what's intriguing about that story is, so if it's not funding, what is it that drives extraordinary impact? And it's those questions that we were wrestling with and undertook this research so we could answer and codify in this book.
And so Kim, for 10 years, did the evaluations for the Henry Kravis Prize, which was administered by Claremont College. And Roy was the first winner. And after 7 or 8 years, Kim said, why don't we come down and we'll get 7 or 8 of the Kravis Prize winners and we'll do peer learning for a day. And it was just a glorious experience. And Kim and I noted after the first couple that a lot of what these leaders with demonstrated impact were saying was consistent with what Kim and I had learned over the years. And so we first did a series of, what was it, webinars or? Articles yeah. Called Fundamentals Not Fads for the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is now part of PAX, which was founded here at the business school. And then Kim, I think happily turned to me one day and said, let's write a book. And we've discovered, any of you have done any writing, as I was just saying to John, all the great writers who talk about writing use violent metaphors, things like, oh, you slash your wrists and you bleed it on the page. And I can only tell you that is an incredibly joyful experience compared to doing book promotion. And I would just like to thank you all for showing up today, because this is our first formal event.
Oh.
And if you each of you buy 2,000 copies, we don't have to do any more.
So give us a brief summary of what exactly is in the book, as a teaser, so people will order at least their first 1,000.
Well, so let me start with our call to action. In our introduction, we review the history of the U.S. nonprofit sector. I think it's well known by all of us. The nonprofit sector in the U.S. is first famously commented on by Alexis de Tocqueville in the 19th century, is unique around the world. And it's given us a lot of strengths. Many of us know, America has somewhere between 15 and 17 of the top 25 universities in the world, and the reason is our philanthropic model. It's just true. We've been able to fund when governments begin to withdraw. Our call to action is, we just ran some numbers, just for those of you, there's a Monte Carlo model in it and all that sort of stuff. And if U.S. philanthropy this year is $400 billion, about a third of that's churches, by 2020, we think the sector's going to fall $100 to $300 billion a year short. And I don't care what kind of nonprofit you're involved in. Could be a university, could be an opera, could be a hospital, could be a social service organization. You're all going to need more philanthropy. And as we have that, plus the famous tech millennials coming through, we basically use the metaphor of an engine, thought about strategic leadership. We call for a clear and focused mission. We call for a strategy that is grounded in a theory of change, a logic model, perhaps even supported by evidence, and impact measures that demonstrate that what you're doing is actually working. Now, in most of our lives, the notion that you have a goal or a mission, a way to achieve it, and a measurement is not controversial. And it remains largely not the model that most nonprofits follow. And we add into that, so we demonstrate, we call ourselves analytics who like Yates, because in the sector, has an ambivalent attitude towards measurement and quantification. And so we add insight and courage, because we all know all the great nonprofits we're involved in, not only in the founder, but very often in the current executive director. They have a unique insight into what they're trying to do, and it takes enormous personal courage that pervades the organization to do it. And then we get into the more concrete day-to-day things. And in our experience, the nonprofits that truly have impact have an excellent board, and we can talk a lot about boards. Most nonprofit boards, we all know. I mean, you sit there and you just wonder how so many talented people can have no apparent influence and impact. We can talk a lot about fundraising and what's going on, and again, the last 20 years has been a call from Foundation and others for sustainability and earned revenue. And at a certain level, we're all for that. But we can tell you the next era is going to be about more philanthropy, including, we hope, to the social services organizations. And lastly, on organization and talent, we talk about two things: the team-of-team models, which we think being pioneered again by Bill Drayton at Ashoka, who was my first mentor and founded the movement we call social entrepreneurship. He's organizing Ashoka around team of teams. It's a model many of us are working in today. And we also borrow from the great organizational thinkers, starting from Peter Drucker, and have our 6 elements of a high-performing nonprofit, which you have to have in a book like that. So Kim, I've kind of done the survey. Anything you'd want to call out of that particularly?
No, I think we chose the metaphor of the engine because we believe very firmly that these 7 components all have to function at a high level at the same time, and that malfunctioning in any of these parts can really drag the performance of the entire thing down.
Let me come to one of the points you made at the end, which was you take a lot of frameworks from for-profit corporations and the work that's been done on high-performing organizations, some of it done here at the GSB, and you apply it to nonprofits. So you're running a nonprofit, Kim. So how do you think about the difference between running a nonprofit and where are the closest parallels to the corporate sector, and where's the biggest distinction in your mind?
I think one of the biggest distinctions is mission, in the sense that in the nonprofit sector, organizations are inherently mission-driven, and missions can also be the reason that things fall apart, whereas in the corporate sector, there's inherent clarity of purpose. We're maximizing shareholder value, and so stakeholders might disagree, but there's this guiding principle. Whereas nonprofits come with all of these stakeholders, and they often have different agendas, or at least, if not different, competing and whatnot. And so the mission in the nonprofit sector is a really critical tool, especially when it's very tightly focused, to make decisions about which programs to pursue, which to exit, which to avoid. And in addition to having a tightly focused mission, the organization has to have its activities actually abide by that. And unfortunately, many don't, and we get a lot of mission creep, which Bill and I think is a leading virus in the sector. And to make a distinction, in the for-profit sector, if a bakery business suddenly decided to start manufacturing pianos and tennis rackets and developing software, people would raise an eyebrow, and that would be an inherent problem. And yet the equivalent can happen in the nonprofit sector, and nobody blinks. So I think that's a really important distinction.
Or they would rename themselves, instead of being Google, they'd be Alphabet, and then have more,
Well, and Jon, you talked about corporate strategy and business and what it relates to nonprofits. And on a couple of important points in the book, we have to use the data from business and argue by analogy, because there's just one inherent constraint to doing analysis of performance in the nonprofit sector, which is there's no dependent variable. And we can argue about SROI and all sorts of things. You and I, we were talking about lunch. I think the problem of comparing the cost and benefit of Stanford Hospital and the San Francisco Opera and the Ravenswood Medical Clinic is too hard for me. It's just too hard for me. And so we know from corporate strategy that it is conclusive that focus always beats diversification. There might be one company, an error that you argue about. Used to be GE, now it's Danaher. But by and large, if you're a company, you're supposed to focus. And yet, as Kim points out, we have many nonprofits that do 2 or 3 things, and they're generally quite smaller than businesses. If you ran a $1 million business, would you have it do more than one thing? Of course not. And yet nonprofits will argue that. And often it's because some foundation or donor came along and said, well, we only fund programs. Our program is for midnight basketball. And guess what? We now have a midnight basketball program. Well, just not clear at all. We also talk, the last thing I'll say is I teach, and it's true, all nonprofits operate in markets. When Eastside Prep opened up 4 charter schools in East Palo Alto, it was in complete market failure. There was no high school. literally. Everybody either had to bus or what have you. It was an awful situation. And obviously, we want many nonprofits to go into markets that are in failure, and they're in failure because the profit motive is somehow not available. But if you look at hospitals in the U.S., very different than most of the country. 75% of the hospital beds in this country are nonprofits. In the Bay Area, we have Kaiser Permanente, we have Sutter, we have Stanford, we have UCSF. You know, those are all nonprofit beds. Having said that, you only have to look at TV or billboards on 101 to know these are very commercial organizations. And they're making a trade-off. The economic research shows that in areas where there might be contract failure, which is to say the consumer can't really tell whether they're receiving a quality service, that nonprofits might in fact deliver a higher quality service. On the other hand, we know that there's no more powerful model to scale an organization and make it productive than being a business. And so the last thing I'll say is, yes, there are important lessons from business for nonprofits, but don't go to your first board meeting and say, this thing needs to run more like a business. Yeah, it needs to do that, but it also needs to do two other things that are at least as important. And so it's a more sophisticated message.
The mission point is really interesting, and I'm curious about the following, which is whether you think for-profit corporations now actually have to be more mission-focused. And the two things that make me ask that question. One is, if you take the students that we have now at the business school, and they talk about what it is that they're looking for when they look for a job, one of the things that will always come up in that discussion is they say, I want to look for an organization whose values are aligned with mine and who have a mission that I believe in. And when we bring in corporate leaders, organizational leaders of for-profit companies to talk here, say at View from the Top, the one thing that they almost never say is, our mission is to make money for our shareholders. What they say is, we have a great mission of serving our customers, our employees. I don't know that every time in the world that would have been true, but that seems to be very much the way people are thinking now, or at least talking now.
Well, let's do a whole nother hour and a half on this one. So I learned here that certainly publicly traded companies need to maximize shareholder value. This is because of economics. It's not because of choice or mission. Of course, it's attractive to any of us. A good culture, values that we support. Myself, I would like corporations not to focus on corporate social responsibility, but ethics. Just give me strong ethical performance. To me, there's no necessary reason that a corporation has as a skill set to have a positive impact on society. If you look at most corporate foundations, a large amount of the money they give is now marketing money. Some of it's good citizen money. And I don't think the record of corporate foundations as change agents justifies a lot of enthusiasm. The last thing I'll say is, of course, we all want to work with organizations whose values are similar to our own. There are a lot of people going to work in the last few years for Uber and other companies where, first of all, the social mission, to me at least, is unclear, and the values of a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, from my point of view, could use not so much social, but just basic human values and ethics, right? I don't necessarily want them. Well, in the first instance, I want them to be successful companies. But in the second instance, how about treating their people well? And forget about whether or not they can be change agents for the East Bay or something. Kim, you want to?
Well said.
And you have a great chapter in the book about managing people inside the organization. Let me ask about, actually, I'm going to ask about boards, but I'm actually just curious about this. With how many people in the audience serve on a nonprofit board? That is unbelievable. I have to say that's pretty fabulous. That must have been 2/3 of the hands in the audience. What advice do you have for people serving on nonprofit boards from the research you've done?
So I have my quip, my swing thought for you. It'll sound harsh, and I'm completely right. Which is, how many of you who just raised your hand have sat on a board which you have felt is dysfunctional?
It was slightly less than how many are serving on a nonprofit board.
Yes, exactly. And so my swing thought is very simple, which is ask stupid questions until you figure out what the smart questions are. Ask the smart questions until you get a smart answer. And if you don't get a smart answer, resign. There's an enormous amount of opportunities for all of you. You're a scarce resource. You've got leadership, you've got experience, you've probably got some money, you've got a network of friends to bring to bear. If you're sitting in a nonprofit board and it's not making any sense for 3 times or 4 times in a row, it's not your problem. It's not because you don't understand social work or doctors or orchestras or faculty. Well, maybe faculty, you can't understand.
No comment.
But the point is, listen, our book is seated in deep intellectual thought and rigorous analysis. Either that or it's all common sense. And so there's almost nothing on a nonprofit board, certainly of $1 million, $10 million, even on the board of Stanford, which will not yield to your thoughtful, rigorous thinking. Now, does that mean the first idea out of your head? Well, you know, and I've been 20 years in business, and every time I know what about me, no. I mean, take the time to learn. Take the time to learn. It is different. Motivating social workers is different than motivating retail employees. But just bring a rigorous eye. You know, there's a joke that nonprofit staff, I've spent at least as much time with nonprofit staff members as board members. And, you know, sometimes they say, after the board meeting, really, please make sure you write the check before the door hits you on the back. I mean, not all nonprofit staff are pure in their interests with the board. And you have to understand where they're coming from. And so I'd empower you to exercise your common sense and also view yourself as a scarce resource. If you're on a nonprofit board and you're not having impact, even, we join nonprofits because of our friends, because of our social aspirations, all sorts of reasons. Virtually all of you have a contribution to make. And you should find a nonprofit where you feel aligned.
I would add a couple areas where I think GSB alums can make a particularly useful contribution on nonprofit boards. One of them is on mission. We already talked about that, but make sure that you are the mission creep police on your board. And the other one is on this topic of quantitative evaluation. It is astonishing how many nonprofit organizations have little or no evidence that their intervention actually works. And so make sure that you are the voice on the board asking for the data. And there's so many organizations that will push back on that request. And
it's too expensive, Kim.
Oh, and it's qualitative.
It's too
expensive.
You
can't measure something qualitative. Don't reduce our work to mere numbers, right? But, I think we take the perspective that, yes, that's right, but you can learn something from the process of trying to translate the qualitative into the quantitative. And the board plays a critical role there in asking for the numbers. And we give this example in the book of Willow Creek Community Church, which there was a GSB alum who was working at this church, and they decided to undertake this quantitative analysis on something as touchy-feely as spiritual growth. And they did this whole rigorous McKinsey-style quantitative analysis, and they came out with answers that fundamentally shifted the way in which they did their work. And if they had stopped and said, "Oh, you can't measure something like spiritual growth," well, they might not have learned what they learned from that exercise. And so we hold that as an example of the extreme, but to make the point that almost every organization can, in fact, measure and should.
Yeah, and again, back to the incentives of the staff. How many of you like to receive negative feedback? Yeah, so the problem is if you're, let's say, an established nonprofit leader and somebody comes on the board and says, no, you really want to measure it, and oh my God, Jesus, do I want to be, I don't want to be measured. So you just have to be thoughtful, rigorous, patient with them, but persistent because, in the end, let's talk a little bit about fundraising. The single biggest choice many of us have as board members is whether we're going to fundraise. Very few people want to fundraise. And frankly, a huge portion of your power as a board member will come from your own generosity and that you might be able to raise. In today's world, certainly in our world, one of the first three questions people are going to ask is, do you do any performance measurement? And so, in advance of going out for the capital campaign, if I was a board member, I would sure want to be able to answer the basic questions we've been talking about. Is there a clear and focused mission? Is there a strategy grounded in a theory of change? And can you show me something which demonstrates that this organization is actually having the impact that it's aspiring to achieve? Anyway.
On the fundraising side and the philanthropy side, you talk about philanthropy in the book. I've got two questions about philanthropy, and you take either one. One was about whether you think that philanthropy is changing from a model where people want to support more traditional organizations that they feel good about and recognize them to more strategic philanthropy, people looking at impact or results. And the second is how you think about the philanthropy, and we're in Silicon Valley, there's been a lot of wealth created, how you think about the philanthropy of all of the new generation that has been very successful and is maybe still very young, what you think the impact of those folks will be on philanthropy.
So where do we start? It's a great opportunity to be topical. Let's start with Hewlett Packard, Moore, and then the next generation, Gates, now most famously Chan Zuckerberg, Emerson Collective, Omidyar. What defines a lot of these individuals is the first idea they ever had as an adult changed the world and made them billions. And so, wow, I'm still waiting for that idea. How about you? And so if you go back into the history of the American nonprofit sector and philanthropy, it begins with a very similar generation. A little over 100 years ago, we call it the industrial era. And the U.S. nonprofit and philanthropic sector was essentially created by a group like this: Carnegie, Rockefeller, Sage, Julius Rosenwald, named here, but was the founder of Sears, and the first spend-down philanthropist. And so I think we need to be patient and watch to see what they do. Their first blush effort in almost every case is to say what they learned, which is everything that went before is old, traditional, and I'm going to do new, because the only thing that this sector needs is my intelligence and resources. And most of them are in the second generation, because, you know, the first thing Zuckerberg did was give $100 million to the Newark public schools. And he could have asked anybody, you know, and Bill Gates has had a tremendous impact, particularly in healthcare. But he also spent $1 billion to discover that class size and school size does not affect U.S. public education. So I think we are very optimistic. There's a lot of learning to be done. There's no history at all to guide our thinking on what 40-year-olds do in philanthropy. It's never happened before. They're all learning. Kim and I are both fans of Carrie Tuna and Duskin Moskovitz. Duskin was #2 at Facebook, now runs Asana. And they're just doing a wonderful job. They're in a certain way disciples of Peter Singer, of philosopher at Princeton, who espouses a view, very utilitarian and a humanist, which is that all of our philanthropic resources should go to help the poorest and neediest of the world. Full stop. And until you do that, don't think about anything else. Well, they've worked with a group at GiveWell. They're now called Good Ventures or Open Philanthropy. And they have gone in and done as rigorous analysis as you can into interventions into extreme poverty. Very fact-based, very careful, very thoughtful, very innovative. Similarly, Matt Bannock, who's a graduate here, leads Amidyar. They've really pioneered thinking about the full range of capital. Let's call it impact investing, but bringing the full range of capital to solving poverty and other interventions. So lots of intervention, lots of ideas, and we'll all get to watch.
Let me open it up for questions and see what folks in the audience want to ask about. There's I think, raise your hand if you have a question. We've got a microphone in the back, so we'll get to you with a microphone.
Great. Hi, Adam Stern from the class of 1987. Your book, which I look forward to reading, probably makes
available right now for pre-order on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And by the way, you can order copies for your friends.
Okay, good.
The whole nonprofit board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Probably make some big generalizations across the whole nonprofit sector, which is extremely diverse, from hospitals to social service groups to environmental groups and a lot of other things. Talk about, if you would, sort of how you tried to find the common threads across the different sectors within the nonprofit sector, and what do you think of charity rating services that try to boil down the performance of an organization to a set of stars or grades? And where does that enter into your assessments of performance of nonprofits?
Can I take the second, and then you can take the first?
Sure.
So I'm sitting here for lots of reasons. I met Bill Drayton in 1974, but more proximately, Buzz Schmidt was a member, a close friend of mine from the class of 1978, and in the mid-90s founded GuideStar. And GuideStar was named GuideStar because we thought it would become like Morningstar. But in the end, to collect the basic data, if you don't know GuideStar.org, it's the leading source of information on nonprofits in the US. But we've avoided ratings because fundamentally the nonprofits wouldn't give you the information if you told them they were rating. Charity Navigator is the leading rater. They claim to do things beyond financial ratios. They don't. They can't. Nobody has spent more time on the topic of outside-in evaluation of thousands of nonprofits than I have. And when you come up with a way to do what you're saying can't be done, you let me know. You know, there are some things. You can talk about broad ratios. You can talk about transparency. You can talk about a few things. But just think about evaluating 1,000 nonprofits outside and in. it's just not doable. But Charity Navigator, boy, is doing a great job of leading us all to think they are. Would I give money to an organization that Charity Navigator had as a 1-star? Not without a lot of study, but would I allocate it, allocating your money, your philanthropic money to 5-star charity organizations has all the insight and analysis that allocating all your mutual fund money to 5-star Morningside ratings, which have been shown historically to regularly regress to the mean. So that's just the measurement thing. It's just too complex to reduce to stars. I wish it was easier. And if anybody has an idea to do it, it would end our 25-year search.
And on the question of diversity, there is enormous diversity in the landscape of nonprofits. And one of the reasons that we wrote the book is because we were so struck in these peer learning retreats that we were facilitating for nonprofit leaders that there was so much similarity in their experience, both in their successes and their challenges, even though they worked in completely different areas, in different geographic areas, different kinds of interventions, everything from public health to education and across the board. And yet, the key fundamental drivers that made them extraordinary and effective were similar across them. And so that was the effort to write the book, was to sort of really distill what are these things that, whether you're an arts organization or a homeless shelter in Cincinnati, what are the common things that you can all do to increase your impact over time?
So one of the things that's very common in the nonprofit sector, I call art and science, which is many of these organizations and nonprofits, whether they're a university or a hospital or a social service organization or a symphony, they have church and state. They have the state. They have faculty members, they have social workers, they have singers, they have doctors. These people are professionals. They have a professional mission, and there's a reason why they've chosen to affiliate with a nonprofit. There's a cultural element to it. That's not true of every kind of nonprofit, but it's true of, churches, for example. It's true of probably 75 or 80% of the sector. And that's a large part of what makes nonprofits uniquely challenging to manage and lead. People talk about mergers of nonprofits like it's this big trend. Well, companies merge because of financial incentives that lack in the nonprofit sector.
Let me follow up on the question, and then we'll go back to the audience. So one particular, you talk about measuring impact, and a lot of the nonprofits you talk about are ones that are helping needy people. There's another category of nonprofits which are cultural organizations. A lot of them are struggling. Symphonies, ballets. Right. We think about it here at Stanford because it's much easier for us to raise money, for example, to build out the medical center than to support the arts, just as a broad generalization. Any particular things for the cultural sector that, are they, because they have some of the biggest challenges from the frameworks you give?
So I just retired as a life governor of the San Francisco Symphony after 27 years. I just helped the new general director of the San Francisco Opera transition in his new role. More philanthropy, more philanthropy, more philanthropy. Anybody planning to pay more for their tickets to concerts next year? It's, 150, 250, 300 plus a required donation. The big opportunity for most of these performing arts organizations is to cut their price and get more people to come. That's less economic. Most of them don't get hardly any government money. They're going to get less. Some of us, I don't know what you all think, believe that investment returns in the next 25 years might be less than the previous 25 years. If you have a payout of 5.5% and real returns are 3 or 4%. And so just as a matter of simple arithmetic, these organizations, you probably all know, it's been around the sector forever. Bill Baumel's original research with Bill Bowen at Princeton, it's called the Baumel's cost disease. It just means that this auditorium has so many seats, and you know, once it's sold, you're paying the orchestra so much, there's no economies of scale. And let's not talk about the Metropolitan Museum, Metropolitan Opera and video. You know, maybe it makes $1, maybe it doesn't. So I think all these organizations are trying everything they can to escape the inevitable, which is they're going to have larger endowments and larger annual campaigns. And one of the things they're doing, a little bit like philanthropy, is they're saying, what can we do to get the millennials come? Well, it is generally true, we all know this, very few of us go to the performing arts regularly until the kids are teenagers. And so 28-year-olds don't go to the opera much. A few, but not much. So, you know, it's just going to be more philanthropy. I don't know how else to solve it. And then, by the way, it's probably true of a leading university. Unless you're planning to raise tuition more aggressively.
I would love to lower our tuition, actually, make the economics better for the students. But as you say, I'll give you an example. The cost disease they talk of course, this is characterized at higher education. 2 nights ago, I was at the SEP reunion. That's our summer executive program. It's the 65th reunion, just to give you a sense of cost inflation in education versus other sectors. The first summer we ran the SEP program, 65 years ago, we charged $750 for the summer program. And today we charge, I think it's $75,000. The costs have gone up 100x for that program over 65 years, which is higher than inflation. Okay, who's got another question out there?
You mind if I do my commercial here?
Go ahead.
So first of all, you know, John doesn't want to say this, but executive education is one of the few things where you can charge a market price.
Yes.
Okay.
That is
right.
true.
So that's a, you know. Can I give my commercial for Stanford or not?
Go for it,
All
but
right.
absolutely.
So obviously, I'm asked from time to time about giving to elite universities like Stanford, and I have to tell you, I'm a far more positive proponent than one might guess. Goes back. I worked with the Gordon Moore Foundation in the first 3 years of it coming together, and I met a man named Ed Penholt. Terrific guy. Started Chiron, ran the Berkeley School of Health. He was hired by Gordon to create a program to fund the basic sciences in a way that the biosciences have been funded. I said, Ed, what's your thought about that? He said, I only know 2 things. Number one, great science is done by great scientists. And so, first of all, if you want to have an impact on the world, with an existing institution, I'm everything at Stanford, including an employee. And a lot of us who have a casual relationship with the university say, you know, it's actually very well run, in a certain way, right? But we have thousands of faculty who are highly incented to do world-class research and teaching. They just are. And it doesn't look like a business, I can tell you that. But I will tell you that certainly in particular areas, our philanthropic model for this university, our elite universities, like it or not, are one place where we continue to distinguish ourselves around the world. And so the only thing I can say is, number one, there's a lot of great researchers and teachers at this university. And secondly, the model let's put it this way, Stanford University runs a lot better than any private foundation I know. So, and nobody knew I was going to say that.
I didn't prompt him on that one.
Hi, I'm David Golub, also class of '87. My question is about the role of the GSB. So we've heard today, we've talked about new era of philanthropy. I think everybody agrees on that. We've talked about how there's an increasing need for philanthropy because of a variety of different factors, including reduced government spending in a number of areas. We've talked about how philanthropies are often not well run. So my question for you is there an opportunity for the GSB to become more involved in a variety of different activities, all aimed at increasing the effectiveness of philanthropy?
Yes, and I would also say it's university-wide. Let me start with the Center of Social Innovation that I had something to do with starting, and now the Center for Philanthropy and Civil Society, which used to be part of the business school, is now part of the university. And PACS is focused on bringing the best of academic research to these questions of impact. By and large, the academics have stayed away from philanthropy in the social sector. As Jon can attest, you didn't get your PhD 15 years ago by doing research of nonprofits or philanthropy. We've begun to start an era where there's going to be more research. And in terms of the GSB, the CSI and the PMP are thriving at a level that, well, again, I've been here teaching for 20 years. It's more vital than ever. The nonprofit management courses get great registration, and now there's more of them than ever. They love impact investing, corporate social responsibility. You know, I think it was 10 years. Anyway, I was at David Krebs was speaking to a group like this, and some old alumni, older than any of us, I can't hire those GSBers. They're too expensive and they're too entitled. And I'm not going to say that issue because, after all, most of our kids are millennials. So how did they get that entitled? But I will say that there is this social conscience, sometimes non-specific, but very specific in other times, of a desire to give back in some way. And, you know, I think the GSB is very open to doing even more to support our graduates in wanting to do that. I mean, I think the GSB is much more focused now on a broader life of leadership than only just business leadership or entrepreneurship leadership. But I think, you know, talk to Jon or Neil Malhotra or Bernadette Clavier. They would all be happy to engage with any of you on the topic of what more you might do here for the students. There's also all sorts of executive education here and around the university for nonprofit leaders that wasn't there 10 years ago.
And working in the sector, you know, the mark of the GSB is there for me every day, not only in the way that I approach problems and the tools that I acquired here, but also in the colleagues that I have. You know, I have this wonderful network of people who also went to the GSB and who are working in the social sector, and we speak a similar language and approach problems in a very similar way.
I'll just chime in on that question because I think it's a great question, actually, and you know, I would say there's at least three ways, and there might be more, that a place like the GSB can have an impact on nonprofits and the sort of generally their objectives. One is through the faculty and the work they do, the research they do, and having folks like Bill and Kim on the faculty. Another is through the students. You know, I think the fact that 2/3 of all of you are on nonprofit boards, that's actually representative of our alumni population. So it's the amount of engagement our alumni have is enormous. And if you look now at the students, 1/3 of our students last year were involved in some sort of social activity, community activity, social activity through the Center for Social Innovation, which is a historically high level at the school. And then the last is we do direct impact things. I mean, something like SEED, and Kim oversees King Philanthropies, which was very involved with SEED. It is a way to sort of do things that are, in a sense, forwarding the social mission of the university in addition to the educational mission. Okay, I want to give you guys a chance to wrap up with any final takeaways. Give us a sense of, you know, what can they expect if they buy the book, and what would you leave them with as a piece of wisdom? Maybe not the whole thing, because they got to go out and read it, but.
Well, I'll just say at a personal level, my God, there's nothing like rereading something. Well, it took Kim much more work because she's so much part of the writing. And as everybody knows who works with me, I don't actually do anything anymore. But I will tell you, for me, it was 15 months of 3 to 4 days a week of 4 hours. And I am happy to report that I find it very readable and contentful. And we'll know in about a month whether anybody else does. But it's intended to be both highly substantive and grounded as best as we can find in fundamental economic and other concepts, but also seeing the limits, and at the same time to be something that everyday board members or executive directors would like to read. And but it's hard to talk about one's own book.
The other thing I would add is that we developed a number of resources that accompany the book. They're up on our book website. For Philanthropists, we have a payout model. And for all of you who are on nonprofit boards, we developed a diagnostic. We call it the Engine of Impact Diagnostic. And it's a set of questions that if you're on a board, you can answer the questions. It takes about 10 minutes. In order to get an assessment of how your organization fares on these 7 elements of strategic leadership. And what's really interesting is to ask other people at the organization that you're involved in, ask them to take the diagnostic as well, and everybody print out their results, and then come together and talk about areas where you agree and areas where there's a discrepancy in your viewpoint. Maybe because some people think that things are going very well with your strategy and others have a different opinion. But it's a useful tool, so I'd encourage you to check that out as well.
And Kim led a survey of 3,000 nonprofit leaders.
That will be released this week.
And the survey, you can connect to a matrix that we did, which reflects that data and shows, you know, kind of standard business school consulting 4-box matrix. You can compare your answers with what the survey data said for the sector overall. And also, you just mentioned the payout tool. The payout tool, people are talking all about pay down, spend down, and versus perpetuity. And almost nobody I know ever does the arithmetic, right? Which is, you know, they say things like, I'm going to give it all away in my grandchildren's life. Well, if you do those numbers, it just turns out, because you all know net present value and all that, you know, your grandchildren's life and perpetuity arithmetically in terms of the pay down is not that much different. And so you can play with this model if you want, if you've got a lot of money to give away, and begin to think about how, over what period of time you might want to do your philanthropy.
Fabulous. Well, Kim, Bill, thank you so much.